What's poppin', Attack Squad? It's your boy SatAttack. When y'all see a title, man, we're back with a Mr. Ballin' video. I missed the last two. Of course, I didn't miss this one now, but I missed the one from last week. But we're back. Entire village dropped dead overnight. Mature audiences only, bro. That's the first time I've seen mature audiences in the title. Hey, I think we're mature enough, man. But road to 2K, help brother out. We're gonna dummy, man. Help brother out, man. Road to 2K. Let's get into, man, 26-minute video. And y'all know we like Mr. Ballin' over pause, but like, hey, I love his videos, bro. Entertaining as hell. Worth the 26 minutes. It's gonna go by fast as hell, but hey, get y'all snacks if y'all want them. But let's get into it, man. Help brother out, road 2K.
In a tiny rural town in West Africa.
So I know y'all mess with these reactions, or comment that y'all mess with these reactions, so I can keep doing them every week.
Heard a loud booming sound coming from outside. Most of the villagers thought this sound was thunder. Others had no idea what it was, but the noise seemed insignificant. Little did they know that sound was actually a death sentence. They just didn't know it yet. This story sounds like it was pulled straight out of an apocalypse movie, except it really happened. And the scary part is, it could happen again today. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format,
the way he explains the stories is crazy, bro.
And we upload once
he really
a week.
Be
so
talking
if that's
like
of interest
movie.
to you, please offer to make.
He be talking to a point where you can visualize what the fuck he's saying. You feel me? You have like
button, a
forgot what it's
s'more,
called.
But instead of chocolate, use mud. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't
some
miss
type
any
of
of our
writing
weekly
or
uploads.
some type of.
Okay, let's get into today's story.
Where you visualize what he's saying. Unknown, unnatural hazard, unknown. There's about to be some ghost activity.
Before sunrise on August 22nd, 1986, a man named Ephraim Che woke up feeling groggy and confused. As he lay in his bed inside of his small mud brick house perched up on a cliff, he tried to remember what happened the night before. He didn't know why, but he knew, something happened last night. I gotta remember it. But as he lay there kind of jogging his memory, he felt like there were holes in his memory, like he couldn't quite piece together what had happened the day or night before. However, there was one thing he distinctly remembered about the night before, and that was at some point he had heard one really loud boom of thunder outside. And Ephraim, kind of somewhere in the back of his mind, had thought, oh, it's gonna rain tonight, and maybe when I wake up it'll still be raining. And then Ephraim, no matter how hard he focused, he couldn't really remember how much time passed after hearing that booming sound and then getting in his bed the night before. But at some point he remembered being in his bed and feeling kind of sick. And that was it. That was his whole memory of the night before. And so that morning, August 22nd, when Ephraim has suddenly woken up feeling confused, he rolled over and he looked out the window right nearby his bed, and he looked outside and he saw the sky was clear and the grass was totally dry. There was no indication that it had rained anytime recently. And so Ephraim is thinking to himself, something is definitely off here, but I just can't get my mind right. And so finally, Ephraim just sits up in his bed, he swings his legs out of his bed onto the ground, he stands up and practically falls over once he's on his feet. But he eventually gets himself back up, kind of steadies himself, and then he thinks, okay, I need to go check on my 4 kids and make sure they're okay. But the second Ephraim began to move in his house, it was like his body didn't obey his mind. Because moments later, instead of checking on his kids, Ephraim had wandered out his front door and was just standing out in front of his house, just kind of staring off into the distance, having no idea why he walked out there. The village where Ephraim lived was called
My boy possessed? What the fuck?
NAWW, and NAWW is extremely rural. There's no electricity, there's no running water, and there's no paved roads for miles. The village is actually split into 2 parts. There's Upper NAWW and Lower NAWW. Ephraim lived in Upper NAWW, right near this big, beautiful lake called Lake NAWW, but the majority of villagers lived in Lower NAWW, which was below the lake. So that morning, after Ephraim kind of found himself standing outside of his hut for no reason, he began looking around in hopes that other people would be out and about in Upper NAWW, where he lived, so he could go talk to them and try to figure out what was wrong with him or, what was going on generally. But as he scanned around Upper NAWW, he saw there there was not another soul anywhere. He was it. He was the only person walking around. So, without giving it much thought, Ephraim decided he would just start walking down towards Lower Nios to try to talk to someone down there. And so he left his hut and he began walking down the hill that would take him to Lower Nios. After Ephraim got about halfway down this hill, right when he was near Lake Nios, he stopped because suddenly he became totally aware of the fact that the world was totally silent. Normally, the baboons in the nearby forest would be barking and insects would be humming and birds would be chirping, but now it was just completely, totally silent. Even the mosquitoes that were a totally annoying constant in Ephraim's life were gone. It was like the entire world had just shut down. And as Ephraim is looking around, wondering what is going on here, he hears off to his right, over near the lake, a woman shrieking at the top of her lungs. And so Ephraim whipped his head in the direction the screams were coming from, and he saw there was this woman about 100 feet away. She was a local, and she was looking right at Ephraim, and she was barely dressed, and she was ripping the rest of her clothes off, and she was just screaming. And so, acting on instinct, Ephraim immediately turned and just started running towards this woman. And as he's bounding towards her,
don't do that. If she, then what? I'm sorry, that is the instinct. But like, bro, she's screaming, she's taking her clothes off. Hey, she's something going crazy. Turned
and just started running towards this woman, and as he's bounding towards her, getting closer and closer, he's starting to notice there's these strange shapes on the ground kind of near this woman, but as he was staring at them, he just couldn't quite place what they were. But when he got about 20 feet away from this shrieking woman, he stopped again because he realized the shapes on the ground were this woman's entire family. They were all just laying on the ground as if they were sleeping, and near them was all of their cattle, also just laying on the ground as if they were sleeping. But as Ephraim stared at each of these people and each of these animals on the ground, he saw there was some blood around their noses and their mouths, and he realized no person who's sleeping would be that still. These people are all dead. These animals are all dead. And so standing there, Ephraim turned his attention from the bodies back to this woman who had dropped to her knees, and she was grabbing her father's arm and yanking on it and screaming for him to please wake up. But Ephraim could tell there was nothing she could do. Everyone was gone. And Ephraim knew somewhere deep
down. There's nothing really much I can say, bro. This is just like, you wouldn't just have to sit here and watch this at this point, bro. There's nothing I can say, nothing. Alright, bro, I know it's a reaction, but there's nothing I can really say at this point, bro.
That, he's supposed to go over and help this woman or console her. But suddenly this wave of fear came over him. The combination of having no idea what's going on, his mind really wasn't working still, and now seeing all these dead people, it was like he just couldn't handle it. And so even though he felt terrible about this, Ephraim took one last look at this very distraught woman and her deceased family, and he turned and he ran away. And when he got back to the main trail, he continued downhill in the direction of Lower Nios.
Real photo of Nios? Damn.
Like all of you, I spend virtually all of my time daydreaming about climbing onto the back of a wild stallion and galloping down a deserted highway into an abandoned city full of zombies that I need to fight off using my wide array of strange DIY weaponry. The villagers in Lower Nios lived in these tiny huts with tin roofs that were closely grouped together, and usually, even early in the morning, Lower Nios was a very happy and lively place with kids running around and animals walking in the road and music playing. But as Ephraim came down the hill and was within earshot of Lower Nios, it was deadly silent. And so with panic starting to rise inside of Ephraim, he began to run at full speed, hoping that when he turned the corner and looked down the main road of Lower Nios, he would see the people he was hoping he would see. But when he turned the corner and looked down Main Street, all he saw were dead animals everywhere. They completely covered the streets, the sidewalk, everything. And so at this point, Ephraim was so desperate to see another person that he kept his eyes looking straight ahead so as not to look at all the dead animals, and just ran straight into Lower Nios, and he turned towards the first hut he saw, and he ripped the door open and he stepped inside, and as soon as he did, he just stopped. Because on the ground right in front front of him was a woman who was very clearly deceased, just laying in the middle of the floor. She had a bowl of corn right near her hand, as if she had been eating and then just fell dead. And so Ephraim was staring
imagine waking up everybody in your city, or of course a village, they're like all gone, bro. Like there's no, like everybody, like every single one, even the animals, bro. Imagine being him, bro.
This dead woman,
the whole
and then
village
he looks
gone.
up and he realizes the bedroom is right in eyesight, and he can see her family.
Imagine one day your freaking village being so alive and shit, and next day they're all gone, bro. Like, hey,
in their beds.
I think there's a village, so everyone, not everyone, but it's like,
and at first Ephraim
a lot of
thought,
people know each
sleeping.
other.
But then, as he continued to stare through the doorway into this room, he saw none of them were moving. Their chests were not going up and down from breathing. Her whole family, they were dead too. At this, Ephraim kind of stumbled backwards out of the hut, and then he turned around to face the road he had just been on with all the animals. And when he saw the road again, it was like a piece of his brain started working properly again, because he realized those weren't animal bodies. All those bodies he saw when he came in, those were people. Yes, there were some animals, but most of them were people. He could see people slumped on top of each other, kind of piled up in doorways. He saw one person who was on his motorcycle in the middle of the road, just slumped over his handlebars, and many of the bodies were either naked or partially clothed.
Bro, like, I know there's no freaking conclusion. I know there's not gonna be no conclusion to the story, but I need something, bro. Someone gotta find out what the fuck happened.
With piles of clothing next to them, as if they had been trying to rip their clothes off as fast as they could, like the woman up at the lake had been doing. And as Ephraim looked around in horror, he also realized that there were no markings or cuts or wounds on any of these people. It was like they were just going about their lives when suddenly they died. And so without anything else to do, Ephraim just continued to walk in the direction he had come into the village, hoping that if he kept on going, he might run into someone who was alive. And so he begins walking down the road, he's stepping over bodies, he has no idea what to make of this, and then way down the road, up ahead, he sees there are two people coming towards him. There's a man and what looks like his son, and they're jogging down the road, stumbling over bodies, running towards Ephraim. And so Ephraim stops, expecting these people are going to stop and talk to him, but as these two people got closer, Ephraim saw both of them, the father and the son, their eyes were wide, and they were looking straight ahead with kind of a distant 1,000-yard stare, and they didn't stop for a second for Ephraim. It was like they didn't even see him. They just kept on running down the road, past all the bodies. Ephraim didn't try to stop them. He just watched as they passed, and then at some point they veered off the road and ran into the forest and disappeared. And it was at this moment that another part of Ephraim's brain seemed to kind of fit into place, because as he watched this father and son disappear, he suddenly had this memory come flooding back into his mind. And it was a memory of when he was a kid and his grandfather told him a story. And the story was about NAWW villagers a long time ago who decided they wanted to cross Lake NAWW from one side to the other. And so their leader magically parted the waters of Lake NAWW, creating a walkway on the lake bed from one side to the other, and the villagers began to walk. And then about halfway across, a mosquito landed on the leader's shoulder, and when he went to slap the mosquito, he lost control of the waters and they came crashing down and drowned all of them. Ephraim's grandfather told Ephraim that the ghosts of these drowned villagers now resided between these two big rocks located near Lower NAWW. And so growing up, Ephraim, along with many other people in this village, believed that because of these ghosts, Lower NAWW must be haunted. And in fact,
do not play with the goods. I don't think I'm mature enough. We still got half the video. We just getting started by ghosts. Oh no, bro. I don't think I'm mature enough, bro. I don't fuck with ghosts at all, bro. Hey,
that was actually why Ephraim built his house in Upper NAWW to avoid these ghosts. And so now, as this memory of hearing this story from his grandfather has come flooding back to Ephraim, he thinks to himself, of course, all of this is the work of those ghosts. And so fearing he would be attacked next, Ephraim turned and just continued running down the road, dodging bodies as he went.
You're gonna get sucked by the air, bro. You're gonna be running.
And as he ran along, periodically he would stop at various tin huts and he would fling the door open in hopes he would find some survivors. But each time he went inside, everybody in there would be dead, lying in their beds or sitting in chairs or lying on the ground. But after running for quite a while, Ephraim turned to go into yet another hut, and right as he reached for the door opened on its own. And standing in front of him was the owner of this hut. His name was Joseph McQuain, and he was in much worse shape than Ephraim. The night before, Joseph had been inside of his hut when suddenly outside he heard that very loud booming sound that sounded like thunder to Ephraim. And then after hearing the sound, Joseph heard his daughter in her bed making this terrible snoring sound. And so instinctively, Joseph turned to walk over to his daughter to make sure she was okay, but he only got a few steps before he collapsed to the ground. He had woken up that morning with cuts all over his arms from where he fell, and he was also totally exhausted and very confused like Ephraim, and so he managed to drag himself over to his daughter's bed, and he pulled himself up onto her bed, and when he got up there, he realized his daughter was deceased. And so now Joseph has opened the door, and he's looking out, and there's all these dead people everywhere, and Ephraim is looking back at him, and Joseph just can't process anything. He's just standing there in a total daze, and Ephraim, he wanted to say something, but no words could come out, and so he too just stood there looking at Joseph. And the two men just stood there right on the threshold of this hut, staring at each other, saying nothing for several minutes, until finally they both just extended their hands and shook silently, and then Ephraim turned around and ran back into the road. And so Joseph at first followed Ephraim kind of out of instinct, but very quickly he veered off from Ephraim, and Joseph went into his neighbor's hut to see if they were okay. But when he opened the door and went inside, he saw all of his neighbors were deceased. But Joseph, he barely reacted to this. It was like he was so numb to what was going on, he just couldn't process it. But after seeing all of his neighbors dead, somewhere deep down inside of his consciousness, Joseph knew he had to go find help. That was his mission. And so he left his neighbor's hut, he ran back to his own hut, he climbed onto his motorcycle, and he started to drive. It took Joseph a long time to drive to the next closest village, but when he got there were people, and they were all alive. And so Joseph tried to tell them what had happened in his village, but Joseph just had such a hard time putting his thoughts together that his sentences just didn't make sense. He was kind of incoherent, and then when he did make sense, the things he was talking about, an entire village just suddenly dying, sounded crazy. And so nobody...
Hey, even if that shit was true, I'm not going there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, bro. You tell me a whole village just died overnight. You want me to go check it out? I'm sorry. You can stay here if you want, but like hey, I'm sorry, bro.
At this other village took Joseph seriously, and so that day, nobody from this other village went to NAWW to see what was going on. But the next day, people from this other village did go to NAWW, and when they got there, it was exactly as Joseph had said. The whole village was dead. And as authorities would soon find out, it was not just NAWW that was affected by this tragic event. Several villages not far from NAWW had also suffered mass casualty events on the morning of August 22nd, 1986. And soon, news of these strange mass death events in West Africa were making the news all over the world. And so on August 25th, 3 days after this terrible event, an American scientist named Joseph Devine turned on his TV and saw the news coming out of West Africa. The newscasters were totally baffled about how this could have happened, and no one can figure out what killed these people, and Devine is just staring at his TV in shock, and then he turns, runs to his phone, and he calls his contact at the US government and told them, "You gotta send me to NAWW." And because his contact knew Devine's background, he immediately said, "Yes, I'll get you on a flight as soon as we can." Devine and his scientific partner, Haraldur Sigurdsson, arrived in NAWW 2 days later on August 27th. When they got there, they saw the military was burying the dead in these huge mass graves, and looking on were the few survivors of this event, like Joseph and Ephraim, along with Ephraim's family. They also survived, as well as other villagers who had come to see what happened. And so as Devine and Sigurdsson kind of maneuver their way through this crowd of very solemn people, they heard them talking about what they thought happened to all these people. And the theories ranged from secret governmental experiments to invisible superweapons to even atomic explosions. Others, like Ephraim, believed this was paranormal, that those ghosts from the drowned villagers had attacked the village. But Devine and Sigurdsson were reasonably sure that none of those theories were correct. They felt like they did know what actually happened because they had actually witnessed a tragedy like this before, but on a much smaller scale. 2 years earlier, and 60 miles south of Nios, in an area called Lake Manoon, 37 people suddenly dropped dead. And Devine and Sigurdsson had been sent out there to try to figure out what happened to these people. And after lots of experimentation, they came up with a theory that explained what happened. And they called it unknown unnatural hazard. They tried to warn people in the area that this could happen again. And in fact, Sigurdsson had written an entire scientific paper about this theory.
Well, that's crazy. Imagine just one. No, do not imagine. Well, imagine that. No, bro. Imagine being there, bro. I know that. Do not imagine it. That's weird. That's crazy. But you're going through your business. You just drop, bruh. That's like no warning, bro. Like you're just gonna just drop and you gone, bro. That's crazy.
Submitted it to a prestigious science
That's
journal.
Crazy. You just
but
drop and
nobody
you're
took
done.
Devine or Sigurdsson seriously. What they were proposing sounded made up. It sounded preposterous. But now, in Nios, it looked very much like their unknown, unnatural hazard had happened again. Devine and Sigurdsson would leave the group of people watching this mass burying take place, and they would make their way up the hill to Lake Nios, where they would immediately get to work taking water samples from deep inside the lake. And after capping these samples, the lids began popping off. And that was the moment that Devine and Sigurdsson knew their unknown, unnatural hazard theory had to be correct. Lake Nios is not your typical lake. It is a crater lake, which means it sits inside of a volcanic crater, which is a big, deep, bowl-like pit that was formed from a past volcanic explosion. And because of this volcanic activity, there is carbon dioxide in Lake Nios. A lot of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, or CO2 for short, is an odorless, invisible gas that we actually breathe out when we exhale. Now, if you inhale a little bit of CO2, that won't hurt you. If you inhale a little bit more, like a medium amount of CO2, you could feel dizzy and nauseous. Your skin will start to feel like it's on fire. You'll have rapid breathing. It'll be horrible, but you'll most likely survive if you stop breathing CO2. And if you breathe in a ton of CO2,
you're done.
You're dead. The CO2 in Lake Nios had been trapped at the bottom of the lake for as long as anyone knew. But on the night of August 21st, 1986, something happened that caused that trapped gas to be released. Now remember, on that night, August 21st, Ephraim recalled hearing what he thought was thunder outside, and also Joseph would recall hearing a loud booming sound that night. Now, we don't know exactly what that sound was, but it's safe to say that that noise, whatever it was connected to releasing the gas. Maybe it was the sound of a rock slide, and big rocks plummeted into the lake and hit the lake bottom and freed the gas that way, or maybe it was just an actual volcanic eruption inside of the lake. Whatever it was, when the CO2 was freed, it bubbled to the top like it bubbled and popped off the lids of their sample tubes, and when it reached the top of the water, it kind of formed a cloud above the lake. Now, we can't see the cloud, but you can imagine a big cloud, and then this toxic CO2 cloud kind of rolled its way down the hill towards Lower Nios and other villages in the area. And when this big toxic cloud began coming in contact with people, with animals, and insects, virtually all of them died. As for the few who survived, like Ephraim and his family and Joseph, they were left feeling horribly confused, disoriented, nauseous, totally dizzy.
I'm just trying to think of that cloud. What did that say?
CO2 poisoning. But when they finally were able to get away from Nios and breathe fresh air, the effects of CO2 poisoning wore off and they were okay. This deadly CO2 phenomenon was exactly what happened on a much smaller scale 2 years earlier at Lake Manoon.
So there is an ending, so we do know what happened. I thought this was just gonna be like a cliffhanger, like we're not gonna know what the fuck happened, so We do know what happened.
It was the unknown unnatural hazard that Devine and Sigurdsson had tried to warn people about. The official death toll of the Lake Nyos disaster was more than 1,700 people and more than 3,500 livestock, although exact numbers will likely never be known.
God damn, that's a lot of people that just left out of nowhere, bro. That is crazy.
Today, people have moved back into Upper and Lower Nyos, including Ephraim, despite the fact that authorities have said that lake is still very dangerous and another unknown unnatural
Hell no, I'm not staying. What the hell? You don't even know when that shit gonna happen again, bro. It can happen any second. You just gonna stay there? Nah, B. I'm out here. Nah. You gotta be fucked up.
AKA a CO2 disaster, could absolutely
Cause you gonna get no warning. It's not gonna be you got a day to leave. There's shit gonna happen again. You got 24 hours to leave. You got 2 days, 3 days. But that shit gonna happen any second. You gone, bro. Like you ain't gonna have no chance to leave, bro. You gonna be gone.
So that's gonna do it.
Hey, Mr. Ballin. Let's see what the comments say. Oh no, I'm not reading the fucking all that. I didn't do it for that, but if you enjoyed that, subscribe to that road 2 kids on the family, go super goddamn. But man, we out here, man. I told you that shit won't go by fast as hell. 26 minutes, that was quick as hell.